Just grin like a clown. It's my kind of town.
Babble, Bullshit, and Beyond, a podcast hosted by me, Marco Kiris, bringing you a standard's perspective of the film industry and an immigrant's perspective on America. The most fluffy, fun pop bullshit you can tune into.
My kind of town, Chicago is.
Today on the podcast, we have Bruce Dumont, the creator of the Museum of Broadcast Communications in Chicago. We talked to Bruce about his illustrious career that spanned 50 years in the radio and broadcasting industry. Through his various political talk shows and tireless work involving the Broadcast Museum, Bruce maintained the history and integrity of radio.
Jazz and each time I leave Chicago.
So, Bruce, you are the founder and the president of the Museum of Broadcast Communications, which began, from what I read, the development was in 1982 and didn't open until 1987. So it's been about 30 years now since it's been open. Let me ask you, how is it doing today? From what I saw, the numbers have dwindled a little bit because of the internet, and people can find things online, and the attendance, so they were charging what I think is a nominal fee of $12 to go into the museum versus free in the previous place. $12 is nothing to be a part of the American pop culture history of radio and TV and broadcasting.
Well, the significant thing that happened, and you touched on it, is that when we were at the Chicago Cultural Center, and again, we closed in 2002, the idea of streaming media and digitization and things of that nature were relatively new concepts. People didn't quite know. YouTube was around, but it had not really taken off. And Netflix and just the massive transformation of American media was in its infancy at that particular time. So when we closed our doors at the Cultural Center, we had we had about 85,000 hours of content. So during that period of time when we were, for a portion of the time, building our new building, we began to digitize our content. We were very early in digitizing the content. And so we were able to digitize in those 5 to 7 years about 10% of our collection. And then it became apparent that because the world had changed and people were able to get content, online, and even the major networks began to offer their own content through their own websites, that being able to watch an old television show was no longer unique. It was when we opened at the Chicago Cultural Center, and there were 24 screening suites. It was really the only place in town where you could come in and watch old television shows.
Wow.
And that was unique to what we did. During this 10-year period of transformation, obviously it became less important. And so our focus was to make that content available online through our website, museum.tv. And that's the principal archival focus of the museum at the moment. But the other thing that we were able to do is that in being a real live museum, we had to come up with exhibits. And so, NBC donated the Meet the Press set that Tim Russert used. We had the donation of the camera used in the very first presidential debate. We began to amass donations of content from people, including the estate of the late Gary Coleman, who was from Chicago. And so we began to put together exhibits as funding became available, which is sort of like a traditional museum. You go in and you read a story on the wall and you press buttons and you watch things, and artifacts are displayed in a way to tell stories. And that was sort of the transformation of what the museum was, a real live museum. But again, the real depth of the museum lies in its archives and our ability to digitize and share that online at museum.tv.
I see. And to this day, where does it stand? I mean, I did read that the second floor is dedicated to the radio industry. Is that correct?
Second floor of the museum is all the National Radio Hall of Fame gallery, and that's where 173 inductees into the Hall of Fame. You can read about them. You can, click a mouse on the touchscreen or touchscreen, I should say. You can hear many of the on-air performers that are inducted in the National Radio Hall of Fame. On that second floor also is the Comcast NBC Universal Center, which is our presentation space, where people can come in. We have our public events. Everything we do there is live streamed. It's also a space that can be rented for private events and seminars and discussions. Our third floor is all about television, national television, and we tell the story of television by telling the stories of genre. And we've divided up into comedy and drama and music and news and game shows and children's shows, and each of those genres tells a particular story of the evolution of that genre. And then we also have interactive, digital components that really give people access to the digital content, available digital content from those eras. So it's an opportunity for people who really love television, even contemporary television, to understand the origins of the medium and to understand the origin of that particular genre. A pivotal story in the history of the museum, and it really relates to Hollywood, which I know that's near and dear to your heart, and as well as those listening to this interview today. One of the pivotal times in the history of the museum involved Lew Wasserman, who was the head of MCA and Universal. He was arguably the most powerful person in Hollywood. I wanted to meet him because I knew a little bit about the origins of the company. MCA, which turned into Universal, was created, and its original home was in Chicago. And so a member of our board, Frances Bergen, the mother of Candace Bergen, the wife of Edgar Bergen, she was on our board because one of our first major artifacts that we received back in 1986 was one of the Charlie McCarthys, the original Charlie McCarthy, as well as Mortimer Snerd and Effie Clinker, who in the 1930s were major radio personalities. They eventually went to television, motion pictures, but he was a ventriloquist who was from Chicago. So she donated those puppets to us, major donation, before we even opened our doors. And so she then agreed to join our board of directors. In fact, the Bergen Foundation continues to be a major supporter of what we do. And she knew Lew Wasserman because obviously she was part of Old Hollywood, as was he. So she arranged a meeting with me and Lew Wasserman, and I am just frightened out of my mind. I'm gonna go talk with the most powerful man in Hollywood. I'm practicing my elevator pitch because I'm figuring I'm probably going to get maybe 3 minutes with this guy. He is only doing it as a favor to Frances Bergen. And so I'm practicing and standing in front of the mirror the night before I have this meeting. I go in and have the meeting. He has about 25% of the top floor of what is now the Comcast building, the tall building in the sky at Universal Studios. So I go in there, and Marco, 90 minutes later, we are still talking. He's keeping the conversation going. And he asks me the question. He said, do you know where MCA was found? I said, yes, in Chicago. He said, do you know what we made in our first year? And obviously I didn't know that. He had in his side office drawer pocket, he had the financials for the very first year that MCA created. He said, you know what made when we were $1 billion company or whatever the case may be. He has all of his financial reports. Just literally, he was taking them out and showing them to me. And he said, I did not spend a lot of my time in Chicago, but it was the move and it was the city that changed my life. I was a young band schlepper from Cleveland, Ohio, when I came to Chicago, an agent. The first non-band act I ever managed was Edgar Bergen.
Oh my God.
And he said, and we used to go around the state fairs of the Midwest. I used to carry Charlie McCarthy around in a suitcase. And he then said, if you're gonna preserve Edgar and Charlie, I want to help you.
Wow.
And then he said two other things that I will never forget. Too many people in this town think Chicago is just a city you fly over. They're wrong. And this is the pivotal thing he told me. Chicago is where the audience is. And everybody out here should understand that. So he then made a substantial donation, which allowed us to build a Edgar Bergen, Charlie McCarthy exhibit at the very first museum. He then provided funding through the MCA Foundation that allowed us to take our index cards and catalog them so they could be searchable in a computer. And he also provided funding that allowed us to do further the beginning of sort of the digitization process. And when the company was sold to Mashusta, which included the Panasonic brand, he provided additional funding, and the television studio that we had at our location on Michigan Avenue was all filled with Panasonic television equipment. It all went back to Lou Wasserman, and Lou Wasserman's inspiration to me kept me going many times. The darkest hours of this museum, it was the inspiration that provided me by Lou Wasserman, and a similar story involving William Paley that kept me going.
Wow. What a story. I mean, I'm so glad I let you say that. That's fantastic. I mean, God bless that man. You would think that there'd be more celebrities who'd be interested in basically doing guest appearances.
We have done that from time to time, but again, it is an ongoing thing. You have to get the right person with the right inspiration. I mean, the people that come to the museum, I think, are impressed by it. So it's people that are coming to Chicago, whether they're passing through, passing over, or they're coming back to visit relatives, because many major players in TV, they came from Chicago originally, so they know some of these, they know some of the local shows that we have, basically on display. But it's anything else. It's word of mouth. We're not, the competition, insofar as broadcast museums. Everyone is aware of, the Paley Media Center in New York, in Los Angeles. All the major players in all the major media companies sit on that board. And again, when they do an event, and they do wonderful events, it's a cab ride or a limousine ride away from a great event in New York or Los Angeles. It's a little bit harder when you're in the central part of America, and you've got to fly people in and do things of that nature.
That's a shame. It's got a great location, I must say. That's a fantastic location. Just like that is prime real estate. I'm saying prime real estate. It's probably worth $1 zillion today. I mean, that's a fantastic corner to be on.
It is worth a great deal. In fact, one of the things that and maybe there is someone listening to this podcast who picks up on this, but one of the things that is still available, we have a fourth floor special events venue. It is, at the moment, it is probably the best place to have an event in Chicago. You can have your sit-down dinner, and again, you can have your reception on the second and third floor, where you're just feeling and sensing and surrounded by radio and television history, and then you have your event on the fourth floor with a beautiful terrace overlooking Trump Tower and State Street. So it's a phenomenal location. We are looking for someone that would want to lend their name to that. It's a $3 million ask, but they would have their name associated with that fourth floor venue in perpetuity, and not only would there be the branding for that individual or that company that would last in perpetuity, but again, it would also allow the museum to completely erase our debt, and so all revenue from that fourth floor would then support the ongoing operations.
I'm surprised that they haven't come forward, Bruce. Like Geffen last year donated, I believe, $100 million to the Lincoln Center and took over that the wing, where the symphonies play, and now his name bears the building at this point.
Right. Well, again, we know, and this is part of my eternal optimism. I know there is someone out there that eventually will want to do that.
I agree with you. I'm surprised Oprah doesn't do it. I'm surprised, if you reach out to people like Geffen, and there are so many other people like Spielberg and Tom Hanks and so forth. And Tom Hanks is a serious player these days in terms of archives for movies and radio and television, and promotes and donates a lot of money to different causes and events and to preserve American cinema and television. He'd be a great guy to hook up with.
No, well, I will just set up a lunch.
Yeah. You never know, actually. Bruce,
know.
I've met kind of everybody, and somebody else like Jerry Bruckheimer, but he's a real film and reality TV kind of guy. But Tom Hanks is much more into the preservation of American pop culture and its historic museums. So you basically started in 1961. The late 60s, you had your own show. You were Beyond the Beltway, which was on for, 30 years?
36 years now.
36 years, and now it's syndicated across the states, from what I understand, and it would change titles to Inside Politics. Did you go to school to become a politician? Why were you so interested in politics, and your entire broadcast was all about politics?
I grew up in a very politically active family, and when my father would take me to school, drive me to school every day, before I got out of the car, we would listen to Paul Harvey on the radio. And we would briefly discuss what Paul Harvey talked about that day, and then later on that night over dinner, we would pick up the conversation. So I became involved and interested in politics from a very, very young age. In 1976, I was doing a local radio show on the public radio station. But in 1980, there was a lot of action going on politically. Jimmy Carter, the incumbent president, was being challenged by Ted Kennedy, and the Republican primary was wide open between Ronald Reagan and George Bush and John Anderson. And so I went to the program director, and I said, her name was Carol Nolan. I said, Carol, I would like to do a show called Inside Politics. And this would be with the operatives, not necessarily with candidates. It would be by, for, and about political animals. And we would speak at a level where we wouldn't, we would not assume that we wouldn't have to go back and explain everything we were talking about, because we were going to have this discussion at a higher level, and the only people that were really going to be interested in this were really political junkies. And so the program went on the air on June 26th of 1980, and it was called Inside Politics. And within about 18 months, it became a very hot cult show. There was a huge story done on it in the local Chicago papers, and it really took on a cult-like following. And we did that for many, many years. In 1989, they convinced me that they would try to syndicate that in public radio. And so we began, and the week after we began the national show was the Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill hearings, which, took politics, in your face. Knock down, drag on politics. It was on the front page of every newspaper. We inadvertently had gone on right at the right time when everybody in the whole country was really charged up. And so the program began to expand the number of affiliates in public radio. And then in 1992, the opportunity to move the show to commercial radio, moving it to WLS, which was the ABC-owned station in Chicago, 50,000 watts. I moved the show from a public show to a commercial show. We moved all of our affiliates that we had gathered in markets all over the country. We moved them from the public station to a commercial station in that same market.
That's a big deal to do.
In 1994, when the Republicans, led by Newt Gingrich, took over control of the House of Representatives, it clearly was a revolutionary time. And at that particular point, we changed the name of the show from Inside Politics, because we were no longer talking about what was inside and happening in Chicago. We were offering national analysis from Beyond the Beltway. And the term Beyond the Beltway was used in the very first program we ever did, back in 1989. However, Beyond the Beltway, the show has existed as Beyond the Beltway now longer than it did in its initial naming of Inside Politics. It was basically the same show with just a flip in the perspective. And Beyond the Beltway is not only the name of the show, it is the philosophy of the show. Because I believe that not all the wisdom in America lies along the banks of the Potomac River. That beyond the Beltway, there are people, it's real people with real passion talking in a very real way. And it's not talking points by political parties that dominate much of the Sunday morning talk show analysis in America. So this is the antidote to that, and we've been doing it for 36 years, and we're now on in 35 markets, terrestrial radio stations. We're on Sirius XM satellite radio, have been for the last 7 years, and it's also a live video stream at beyondthebeltway.com, and it's also a local television show in Chicago, and you virtually can find it anywhere. If you have a computer, and you type in beyondthebeltway.com, you can watch it, listen to it, react to it every Sunday night, and also watch it if you miss it on Sunday night.
And it's still going on all these years, Bruce. And you've won a few awards, some local awards, and from producing a couple of documentaries and TV shows as well. From what I read, it's a long career. It seems like it's almost 50 years.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, Marco, because it dawned on me that I have been on the air, either public radio, commercial radio, behind the scenes, behind the mic, behind the scenes in television, in front of the camera in television. I have been involved in that, and I'm coming up to my 50th anniversary in broadcasting.
Wow. What are you going to do to celebrate that? Are you going to rent out that top floor?
I mean, frankly, it just dawned on me the other day. I don't know, but I'll have to do something, because it's when you think of how things have evolved, and had a reunion of the ABC 7 Chicago family. These are all the people that worked through about 65 years at the station in Chicago, and it was really a stroll down memory lane, and it was during that introduction, because I once worked at that station, that it reminded me that that's where I used to be the front desk receptionist, and then eventually had to leave. That's the first job I was hired and fired at in broadcasting.
Wow.
And it was 50 years ago, and when I chose not to do what the boss wanted me to do, I went to another place, and a month later I began producing television shows in Chicago, and I haven't looked back since.
And you've been successful now for basically 50 years, and I think you should have a 50th anniversary at the museum, truthfully. I mean, there's nothing more fitting than having the company or the state throw a 50th anniversary party on the 4th floor, and potentially get some people to lease it out for $3 million.
Well, that would be a good 50th anniversary present.
It's actually not unheard of.
I think Marco, you've taken on our marketing development role.
Listen, you've done everything else, Bruce. I mean, I don't see why not. It's a great campaign. It's a great way to celebrate your 50th year in the business. You did create it. You were the CEO. You were the president of the company. You took, all these years. It's your heart and soul and blood in your body. Nothing better to do that, and then invite the people like Geffens and Tom Hanks and everybody else, and explain to them in some kind of a nice email as to why this is all happening, and maybe to spark somebody's pocketbook a little bit.
Well, that certainly is a possibility. Again, it's a little difficult to necessarily tell that story about yourself, but again,
yes.
As I think most of the journalists that have covered the story, certainly in the Chicagoland area, know, that it is. We went through this tremendous, almost baton death march for 10 years while we were waiting for the state money. Mm-hmm. And the museum is now open. We'll be open 4 years this coming June. So again, it's we have a lot in our rearview mirror. But I think the great challenge here, Marco, also is as we look towards the future and transition and finding the person that, whether it is the financial person or whether it is the visionary that wants to lead this institution for the next 30 years. Because again, it is that time when the torch should soon be passed to people that can take basically what I've built and expand it. The core elements are all there, and it's a matter of finding someone with the passion and the connections, and to not only from a programming standpoint, but obviously a funding standpoint, and with a degree of vision that figures how do you grow the museum in the next 30 years.
Well, I think it's a great idea, and you keep coming up with creative ways of reinventing different venues for the museum, and I think it's endless. And I think young people should really, if they're in Chicago, it's a must, along with Millennium Park and all the other wonderful sites. It just seems to be that would be a to-go-to place.
No, and we're very interested in reaching out to a younger group of people who really want to participate in helping chart the course for an institution that literally it's about evolution now. I mean, clearly when you talk about, radio or television, first of all, it's now everything is audio and video now. They don't even use, the original terms. But again, it is something, and again, even with radio, I mean, radio is reinventing itself with podcasts. I mean, more and more people are doing podcasts. The number of people listening to podcasts is expanded. So, those people that were saying that radio is dead, well, radio is not dead. Audio is not dead. And this certainly is an example of it. I mean, it's creative people knowing what to do. And the bottom line is they are creating content that people are interested in. And in the mission of the museum, it talks about content. And content is king, and content, the creation of content, it evolves over the years. The delivery system becomes different, but again, it is the content. What is being said, who is saying it, and are they saying it in a creative way, whether it be audio or video? That's the essence of creativity in modern communications.
I agree. I think that there are so many film students, thousands of film students across the states that would be really interested in the museum. I'm going to bank that less than 10% of them even know that this place exists in Chicago, unless you're from Chicago. NYU students, Columbia University students, USC, UCLA students. I'm sure very few even know that these museums exist because they're so into.
The thing is that everybody wants to be remembered. I mean, and I think that's no matter, even if you're in your 30s, you may not be thinking about being remembered when you're in your 30s, but you can definitely go to the bank on the fact that at some point in your life, when you hit around 50, you are going to be concerned about what people say about you when you're long gone. And museums are one way in which people can be remembered in a significant way, and that's what museums do.
I agree with you. I mean, I think it's fascinating. I mean, I'm so proud of you that you actually went through this entire process and had your vision realized through the trials and tribulations of, corporate America and the state and the city and the big companies and the networks. I mean, you've done years and years and years of work.
Also, I mentioned earlier that the story that I shared about Lou Wasserman, a similar story which happened within 18 months of that story. In fact, the story I'm about to tell actually happened first, and that is when the chairman of the museum, the late Arthur C. Nielsen of the Nielsen Company, and I went to see William Paley at his office at BlackRock CBS in New York. We wanted to go to see Mr. Paley because he was the founder of the Museum of Broadcasting at that time. That became the Museum of Television and Radio, and it is now the Paley Media Center. But we went to see him to tell the story of what we were doing in Chicago, and he was very gracious. He welcomed us to his personal office. We had a little lunch right in his office area, the three of us, and we began to talk. And I asked him, how did the Museum of Broadcasting get started? And he told me that story, and he said, well, I'm very pleased to learn what you're doing because broadcasting has reached a point where it really requires the study of more than one institution. And the importance to study television, it took motion pictures over 100 years to get a level of credibility in academia. And he said, you are helping television rise to that level. And so he was very supportive. And here I'm sitting between, I got William Paley on my left, I got Art Nielsen on my right, these two giants. And I said, the other thing is, I want to remind people, Mr. Paley, that so many people that created American television came from Chicago. They came from the heartland. And I said, I certainly know that you were born in Chicago. And then he went on to talk about how he loved Chicago, and when his father took him out of the University of Chicago lab school, he was worried that he was going to have to go east to Pennsylvania. But he said, I ended up liking it. But he said, but I've always loved Chicago. And so I said, well, where did you grow up? And he said, I grew up in Rogers Park. I said, well, Art's from Rogers Park. So the two of them, who are similar in age, they start talking about life in Rogers Park, Illinois. And after a couple of minutes, I said, well, but then he said, but then I moved from Rogers Park. I said, where did you go? He said, well, we moved closer to the lake. I said, where did you go to high school? And he said, Carl Schurz High School. And I said, Mr. Paley, that's where I went. William Paley and myself both graduated from Carl Schurz High School. We are both in the Carl Schurz High School Hall of Fame. Our pictures are right next to each other.
Oh my
The
God.
two broadcast museums in the United States were founded by graduates of the same school.
Oh my God. I've got
And
tingles.
I'll never forget when we're leaving. We're walking out the door. He has his right arm over my shoulder. He literally is patting me on the back. He said, "Congratulations." He says, "You're doing God's work. Good luck to you." And the last one, I want to share this with you.
Please.
The museum was about a year and a half old. It was December. We had sent out our year-end solicitation letters. We were having a board meeting the next day, and we were in very dire straits. We were going to have to begin to cut employees because we were running out of money. We were open, but it was the first real financial crisis that the museum had. And so I had a habit of, after work every day, I was not working full-time for the museum. I would go down to the museum and I would open these letters late at night and see whether there was any money in the return envelopes. And week after, or I was opening all these things, and it was one rejection after another, or there was $5 in this one. And then I literally I'll never forget it. It was late at night. The board meeting is the next day. I open one last letter, and it says, "Dear Mr. Dumont, I have heard of your dream and your work in Chicago from our mutual friend, Paul Harvey. And I wanted you to know that I've instructed my foundation to send along a check for $100,000
Oh my God.
to support your efforts." And it was signed by Walter Annenberg, who at that time was one of the wealthiest men in the world, the man who created TV Guide. And so Walter Annenberg, Bill Paley, and Lou Wasserman, those are the three wise men who walked into my life at specific moments that kept me going for over 30 years with my dream.
Wow. And you've achieved it, Bruce, and you will be known that you have created this museum in Chicago. I think it's fantastic that you've done what you've done. So with that, Bruce, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast and letting us know how everything kind of evolved with the Museum of Broadcast Communications.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it greatly, Marco.
This concludes our podcast with Bruce Dumont, the founder and president of the Museum of Broadcast Communications in Chicago. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you next time. This is Marco Kiris signing off.